Welcome to another installment of Donning the Armor. This morning we will begin in 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 26. And to Abiathar the priest, the king said, "Go to Ananoth, to your own fields, for you are deserving of death. But I will not put you to death at this time, because you carried the ark of the Lord God before my father David, and because you were afflicted every time my father was afflicted." So, Adonijah exalted himself, tried to take on the throne while his dad was on his deathbed. Abiathar and Joab joined him. Then, after David places Solomon on the throne, has him publicly anointed as the next king, Solomon tells Adonijah, "Go on, be peaceful. If I see any inkling of turning on you, it'll be your head. Your life will be forfeit." He then goes and has Bathsheba intercede on his behalf to try to get one of David's former concubines who their relationship had not been consummated, because that's not what she was there for, to bring her then in to be his wife. Solomon sees that it seems as though Adonijah is still playing a game, still trying to pull at any inkling of power his way, to make any claim at a throne. So Solomon sends Benaiah to kill Adonijah. But in that explanation of what was going on, he mentioned, why don't you ask for Adonijah my kingdom as well? And throw in Abiathar and Joab while you're at it, the other two co-conspirators who were close to my father. These high officials who conspired with Adonijah and threw their support behind Adonijah. Why don't you ask my kingdom for them as well? So now you have Adonijah slaughtered by Benaiah. You also had David, before his death, giving advice to Solomon, saying, "Let your wisdom play these things out. But Joab is a vicious, violent man who will seek his own power. He won't seek the throne on you, but he will seek to hold his own authority as the head of the army of Israel. He is ruthless about it, and he will not relinquish it without a fight." Also, you have Shimei, who cursed me. I told him I wouldn't kill him, but never said my son wouldn't, which is a little weird, but basically, this guy can't be trusted either. Which is interesting, because Shimei was one of the people who did not go with Adonijah when he started to exalt himself. Shimei stayed loyal to David, but David's words probably are relaying more that he stayed loyal to me out of pragmatism, not out of loyalty. He probably was not convinced that Adonijah was truly going to sit on the throne. So it's not so much that he stood up for me and you, but he stood up trying to make sure he was positioning himself in a good place still. Because Shimei was one of the people of Benjamin who still looked on Saul's line of the family, or Saul's family line, as still being the rightful kings that David usurped. So here, he's going to deal with the other two co-conspirators, starting with Abiathar the priest. He's saying, you deserve death for what you did. You went against my father to try to install my brother on the throne. And you went against the will of God, because I know you did not inquire of the Lord about this, because the Lord placed me on the throne. The Lord made promises to my father. I'm the fulfillment of those promises. So I know you didn't go to God. And I know you didn't go to my father. You tried to exalt this other brother because that's where you saw the political winds going. And as a high priest, I can't remove the priesthood from you. I can't remove your lineage. I can remove you from service, though. And that's what he's going to get to next. So I can't actually strip you of your position that God has given you through the promises of the law of Moses. But I can remove you from service by sending you home. I'm not going to put you to death, but you're going to spend out the rest of your days tending your own fields in Anathoth. That's where you're going to be. You're no longer going to serve here. So Solomon removed Abiathar from being priest to the Lord, that he might fulfill the word of the Lord which he spoke concerning the house of Eli at Shiloh, going all the way back to 1 Samuel. Eli and his sons, when Samuel was a little boy, God spoke to him and had a word for Eli, that he was going to strip the priesthood from the family of Eli. That family line that came through. And he was going to strip him of it because of the evil that he allowed his sons to get up to acting as priests. The sexual immorality that they were getting into. The cheating of people that they were getting into in the name of God. That he was going to strip that from his family. And we can see that when God promises something, it isn't always immediate, but it happens. So people will say, and I've seen this a lot lately, God lied to Adam because he told Adam, the day that you eat of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. But Adam ate of it and he didn't die. But he did. Because as far as I've been told, I can't read Hebrew, that in the way the wording is in Hebrew, it kind of means, in the day that you eat of this, in dying you will die. So it's saying a little bit more of, you're going to die, you're going to be separated from God, and then you are going to begin dying. And as the old philosophy kind of stuff goes, the day you're born is the day you begin to die. Because we slowly deteriorate over time. And we eventually die. If you're born, you're on a path to death. So God was telling him, the moment you eat of this, you're going to begin that path of death. But more than that, you're going to be now separated from me because you're going to be in defiance of my commands. It wasn't the moment you eat it, you die. That's not the way it worked. And it's not the way it worked with Eli. Think about all the years that have passed. Samuel lived to be an old man. David has already lived to be an old man and has passed away. And now the fulfillment of what the Lord had spoken is finally coming forth. And from here, Zadok, who was also serving with Abiathar, will be promoted to high priest. And he was from the line of Eleazar, who came out of Aaron, but he's from the line of Eleazar where Abiathar wasn't. So that new line is going to be established out of Eli's line. So no, I can't remove the priesthood from you. I can't remove what the Lord has given the Levites in the family of Aaron. But I can remove you from service by making you be almost exiled to your own fields. When the Lord makes a promise, he means it. And although we don't see it right away, it will come. It will come to pass. And it's one of those things that we hold to when we say that there will be judgment for those who do wrong. It might not be immediate, but it will come. And we in our imperfect justice wish to see it happen in our lifetime, wish to see it happen with immediacy. We see somebody butcher a child, we want to see them die immediately. But we're told to reserve our vengeance because vengeance belongs to the Lord. And at some point they're going to get theirs. And what they have coming to them in the next life is going to be far worse than we wish they could experience in this life. So although Eli's sons died, and Eli died long before the fulfillment of this word spoken by the Lord, it still came to pass. There was never a doubt. It's just about what the timing of the Lord is going to be. But Solomon, still being gracious about the service Abiathar had before God and his father. He was the high priest who carried the ark of the Lord God before his father. He'd have been the one that went in the battle carrying the ark. He'd have been the one who served God after Saul had, Doeg, at the insistence of Saul, slaughtered all the other priests after they gave David the showbread in his escape from Saul and into the wilderness. Abiathar was the lone survivor, chased down and found David in the wilderness, and had been with him ever since. Because of that loyalty, Solomon's not going to give him death, even though he deserved it for the treason and disregard of God that he had been guilty of. He's still going to allow him to live out his life. Just, you're no longer going to be in service as a priest. Then news came to Joab, and Joab had defected to... Then news came to Joab, for Joab had defected to Adonijah, though he had not defected to Absalom. So Joab defected to Adonijah. He went out to Adonijah. He looked to see Adonijah placed on the throne. Even though he didn't do it with Absalom. He's the one who killed Absalom in defiance of the request of David. Because Joab was fiercely loyal to David and fiercely loyal to the nation. So he had to have seen something that made him believe that Adonijah was best for the throne. Maybe it was the idea that Adonijah had promised Joab that power to remain general over the armies of Israel, that David had twice looking to take from Joab, and twice Joab had slaughtered his replacement, in Abner and in Amasa. Maybe he believed that Solomon, under the instruction of his father, would remove him from leadership. Adonijah had promised him leadership, and he followed that. So he had no loyalty to Absalom. Absalom also burned his field. But he did seem to have a relationship with Absalom. It was Joab who sought to bring back Absalom, but the first one to kill him because of his loyalty to David. But now Joab has heard Adonijah's been slaughtered. Abiathar has been exiled. So Joab, hearing this, knows his time is up. He knows he was another co-conspirator. His time's coming. So Joab fled to the tabernacle of the Lord and took hold of the horns of the altar. And King Solomon was told, Joab has fled to the tabernacle of the Lord. There he is by the altar. So it's interesting, and there's two quotes. I don't know if these are actually related in where, because from where I have it, it's just a listing as a quote by Spurgeon. I don't know if it was from the same source material or he said it two different times. But these were interesting by Charles Spurgeon. Speaking about Joab, he did not know where to flee, except he fled to the horns of an altar, which he had very seldom approached before. As far as we can judge, he had shown little respect to religion during his lifetime. He was a rough man of war and cared little enough about God or the tabernacle, or the priest or the altar. But when he was in danger, he fled to that which he had avoided and sought to make a refuge of that which he had neglected. You know, it's just saying there's no atheists in a foxhole. And of course, you'll have atheists in the military take one in a foxhole, like in a time of peace. But that's not what we're talking about. When that saying is said, that's not what people are talking about. The point being, when it comes to the end, when you know you're facing death, you start to make appeals to God that you never would have thought you were going to make. Joab, the tough man of war, never would have thought to go and run to the tabernacle before. But now that he knows his life is at an end, he knows that all of his sin has caught up with him. All of his deeds are being brought to light and being brought to their time of judgment on earth. Oh, now he's going to run to the tabernacle. Now he's going to grab onto the horns of the altar, the same way Adonijah did at the end of chapter 1. Adonijah grabbed onto the horns of the altar, screaming out, "Have mercy on me. Have mercy on me." And Solomon did, with the understanding that Adonijah was not going to cause any more problems. But then he had to go and ask Abishag for his wife. Not ask for some woman as a wife, but ask that specific woman, because she had been a concubine, so to speak, of David. You don't really describe her as a concubine, but most commentators mention her as a concubine, as having filled that role. But here now you have Joab running to the altar, trying to look for the same thing. Then Solomon sent Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, saying, "Go, strike him down." So Benaiah went to go to the tabernacle of the Lord and said to him, "Thus says the king, come out." And he said, "No, but I will die here." And Benaiah brought back word to the king, saying, "Thus said Joab, and thus he answered me." So he's saying, I went. I told him, "Hey, come out." And he said, "Nope, I'm not coming out. I will die here. I will die on the horns of the altar." That's what's going to save my life, the horns of the altar. Then the king said to Benaiah, "Do as he said, and strike him down and bury him, that you may take away from me and from my house, from my father, the innocent, or from the house of my father, the innocent blood which Joab shed." So the Lord will return his blood on his head, because he struck down two men more righteous and better than he, and killed them with the sword: Abner the son of Ner, the commander of the army of Israel, and Amasa the son of Jether, the commander of the army of Judah. Which is also very interesting, that they were both commanders of the two basic schisms of the nation. That schism during the time that David first took the crown, and would fracture and break apart after Solomon's death. Though my father David did not know it. So he killed these people against my father's will. And he did not find out about it until after the fact, because he was a bloodthirsty man. So you know what? He says, "Let me die here on the altar of sacrifice." Give him what he wishes. Go strike him down there and bury him. And Spurgeon would have this to say: The lying hold upon the literal horns of the altar, which can be handled, availed not Joab. There are many, oh, how many still, that are hoping to be saved, because they lay hold, as they think, upon the horns of the altar by sacraments. And that, I would imagine, Spurgeon is speaking specifically to the Roman Catholic organization and the Orthodoxy, who hold on that you need to fulfill various sacraments to be saved. Scripture says, profess the name of Jesus and believe in your heart that he is risen from the dead, he is Lord, you have salvation, and that your good works are fruit being born of that rebirth you had in Christ. But these other church traditions add on sacraments that you need to fulfill, works you need to do in order to prove your salvation, to merit it. Spurgeon is speaking to that grabbing onto the horns of these altars that you're holding on to, these things that you can physically do to prove that you have salvation, that you're placing your salvation in those things that you can prove. That's what Joab's doing. He's grabbing a hold of something physical because he neglected the spiritual. He's grabbing a hold of the altar of sacrifice because he neglected his relationship with God throughout his entire life and acted in the way that he thought was right for the nation and in what was right for his own life, regardless of the word of the king or the word of his God. He didn't care about who was Lord over him because he thought he understood what was right and wrong and what needed to be done above all else. That's what led Joab to shed innocent blood, because he thought he knew it all. He thought he stood head and shoulders above the rest. And now he's going to take hold of the physical implements of his faith. The physical implements that the Lord had given his people to show worship to him, without an understanding of the heart that was supposed to be behind the implements. And because of that, it brought him nothing. It availed him not. Because it didn't matter. He's begging for mercy from a man about sin he never repented before God. Ultimately, even if Solomon had forgiven him, this sin of bloodshed that was upon his head would still have been there, because he neglected the relationship with the Lord and that reconciliation he truly needed, to seek reconciliation with the Father who holds judgment not only over the body, which is what Solomon had, but over the eternal soul. That judgment is reserved solely for God. And that is what was not right. And why this entreaty for mercy brought no good to him. So Solomon just says, you know what? He wants this. Slaughter him. It doesn't matter. He wants to die there. That's fine. Let that be where he dies. And then go bury him. And probably bury him nicer than he buried many of the men that he slaughtered. If you remember, he left Amasa laying in the side of the road, bleeding to death. His guts and entrails spilled out all around him. Moaning in pain, that kind of death would take hours for a person to die. Hours of agony. He didn't even have the good conscience to just end him. If a hunter goes in the woods and hits a deer and doesn't have a clean kill in the animal's suffering, they don't just let it limp off suffering. They find it and they put it to death because they don't want it to suffer. But Joab had less compassion for his cousin Amasa because he was placed in Joab's former authority than a random hunter in Virginia has over a deer. So taking hold of that altar, those sacraments that God had placed for his people, availed him nothing. It availed him nothing because he wanted nothing of it. He wanted nothing of the ultimate authority to forgive those sins. God is faithful to forgive all sins. Now in the Old Testament, murder, there was no sacrifice for it. But he still forgave David. Because David came to him with a contrite heart. Was there a price to pay? Absolutely. Absolutely. But Joab had the choice to do the same. And maybe it would have been his life anyway. But he didn't even seek it out. Until his life, the judgment for his life had come, then all of a sudden, he needed that faith to grab hold of those religious ideas for salvation instead of seeking the heart of God. And far too many people put their faith in the religious implementation set before them instead of just seeking the heart of God and seeking his forgiveness. Seeking God in the way that caused David to be named a man after God's own heart. David didn't run to the first implement of sacrament. He dropped to his knees and begged the forgiveness of the Father who sits over him in authority. That's what Joab should have done. That's what we should do. Their blood shall therefore return upon the head of Joab and upon the head of his descendants forever. But upon David and his descendants, upon his house and his throne, there shall be peace forever from the Lord. Bit of hyperbolic speech and command from Solomon that this blood will be cleansed from me and my father's house, and it will fall completely on Joab. That we had no part in the killing of those innocents, but him and him alone. So Benaniah the son of Jehoiada went up and struck him and killed him, and he was buried in his own house in the wilderness. The king put Benaniah the son of Jehoiada in his place over the army, and the king put Zadok the priest in place of Abiathar. Two people loyal to him. Two people who were loyal to David as well, but two people who were loyal to Solomon. Two people that he could trust. And two people who deserved it because of their loyalty to the Lord. Not just to the king. Then the king sent and called for Shimei and said to him, "Build yourself a house in Jerusalem and dwell there, and do not go out from there anywhere. For it shall be on the day that you go out and cross the brook Kidron, know for certain that you shall surely die. Your blood shall be on your own head." So here is Solomon doing what his father had told him. Shimei is a self-serving guy who cursed me greatly. Do what is right in your own wisdom, but don't let his head go down to the grave in peace. He saw that through with Joab. But Shimei, he's giving a bit of a different thing. He didn't side with Abiathar and Joab and Adonijah. He was with Nathan and Benaniah and Zadok. He was for not putting his power behind Adonijah. So he gives him a reprieve, much like he did to Abiathar, saying, you know what? Go build yourself a house in Jerusalem. This is going to become your city of refuge, Shimei. Come out of where you are. You're going to build it here. You are not to leave here. Remember, that was the rule with the city of refuge. You could go there if it was a manslaughter case, which is one of the reasons Joab still had to be put to death. Running to a city of refuge, throwing yourself on the mercy of God didn't work for murder. It worked for manslaughter. Build your house here. You're going to live in this city of refuge. And you're going to live there until the high priest dies. When the high priest dies, you can though go return and be in peace. Now, if you have a younger high priest, you might die before the high priest dies, which means you're going to live the rest of your life in that city of refuge, and you will never return home. You cannot leave the city. If you leave the city for any reason, your life is forfeit to the avenger of blood. And this is the same thing Solomon's setting up for Shimei. You're going to live here in this city. You're going to basically stay here until I die. Now, Shimei is much older than the king, so clearly Shimei is going to die first. But if you go out, your blood's on your own head, just like the person seeking refuge in the city of refuge. And Shimei said to the king, the saying is good, as the Lord my king has said, so your servant will do. So Shimei dwelt in Jerusalem many days. So he's saying, this is great. I'm okay with this agreement. Absolutely. I'm happy. You're not killing me. I get to live. This sounds like a good deal. So I'll live there many, many days. I will live out my time in Jerusalem. I'm loving it. Great. Now, it happened at the end of 3 years, that 2 slaves of Shimei ran away to Achish, the son of Maacah, king of Gath. And they said to Shimei, saying, look, your slaves are in Gath. So we see the heart of Shimei. What's more important? Those 2 slaves, those 2 servants, or your life? Holding to your word. David said, don't let his gray head go down in peace. One of the reasons, even though he didn't side with Adonijah, he didn't side out of pragmatism. But now he has 2 slaves, 2 people of value. They're running away. They're going to Gath. They're seeking refuge outside of Israel. So Shimei arose, saddled his donkey, and went to Achish at Gath to seek his slaves. And Shimei went and brought his slaves from Gath. So he went there, he got his slaves back, came back. Because one thing sinful people did with their slaves in the past is they didn't like runaway slaves. So if your slave ran away to someone else, they're going to give them back to you because they want you to reciprocate. Israel, though, was told in the law that if a slave runs into your city, you're not to return them. If a slave of Achish of Gath had run in to Haran, if Haran or Hebron, if they had run into those places, you're not to send them back. You're to treat them as a sojourner. But now Solomon was told that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and had come back. Then the king sent and called for Shimei and said to him, did I not make you swear by the Lord and warn you, saying, you know for certain that on the day you go out and travel anywhere, you shall surely die? And you said to me, the word I've heard is good. Why then have you not kept the oath of the Lord and the commandments that I gave you? So do you not remember, Shimei, this conversation we had? This conversation that you yourself went, That's good. I like that. That's a good word you have for me. I agree to that. Now, why didn't you keep it then? You kept it for 3 years, but I said never. You were never to leave. Ever. Now, why did you not keep the oath of the Lord and the commandment I gave you? You swore to this, and you didn't keep it. The king said, moreover, to Shimei, you know, as your heart acknowledges, all the wickedness that you did to my father David. Therefore the Lord will return your wickedness on your own head. But King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever. So the king commanded Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he went out and struck him down, and he died. Thus the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. So, you wanted to break your oath that you made before God to me. Now the consequences are going to be what I said they were going to be. Now with the death of Shimei, the death of Joab, the death of Adonijah, the exile of Abiathar, now the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. All the conspirators who went out that had any power in the kingdom under David, they're gone. And now people loyal to Solomon have been put in place. Benaiah and Zadok. For 3 years he gave Shimei a reprieve. For 3 years he lived by that reprieve until his wicked heart needed to fulfill that thing which he wanted. He just couldn't let those servants go. He couldn't let go of that earthly demand for power. The same that Adonijah couldn't. The same that Joab couldn't. They couldn't let go of that earthly thing. Now Shimei put it off for 3 years, living the way he lived. Living in Jerusalem, the richest city in the known world at the time. And it would only get greater under Solomon. But that one loss of that one thing was enough to drive him out of it. To drive him out of the sanctuary and into death. We are offered peace and respite by God. Here on this earth, we're promised later eternity with him. But we're even promised peace and respite on this earth. If we follow the commands that we made, that we swore the oath by when we said with our mouth that we believe Christ. We believe in his promises. We believe in his work on the cross. We believe in him. And we believed in our hearts. We have this respite. But those temptations of life seek to pull us away from it. Now, this isn't speaking about losing your salvation. I've made that known before. When you are secure in the eyes of God, you are eternally secure. You are his elect. Period. We can appear to lose our salvation, though, because we don't know if we're elect. Lots of people profess with their mouth, but don't truly believe in their heart, and they've convinced themselves that that profession with their mouth is a belief in their heart. And as John would say, they have gone out from among us because they were never of us. Shimei had professed with his mouth to Solomon that, hey, what you said is great. I will live in your refuge. I will live under your roof, under your protection, in your presence. I won't go away from it until that temptation of wickedness comes upon you, and then you pull out and you follow the way of the world, going to the Philistines, to seek after a vice of the flesh, to enslave another human, to do that sin with which you know is going to cause ill for you and those around you. You give in to that temptation. See, I'm not turning this into a typology like the last one, but just a more of an overall principle. We have the power to fight temptations. You give in to them too often, you may be showing, like Shimei, that the profession you meant with your mouth, you never truly believed with your heart. Shimei said this is a good word to Solomon, but he didn't truly believe it. He didn't believe it and hold it firm and written on his heart as stone, knowing this is a good thing, I must keep it. Because when that huge temptation to leave came, he took it. I'm sure there were other temptations, but when that one was too much for him to go without, he took it. And we hear this from people who deconstruct. We hear this from people who call them ex-evangelicals. We hear this from people who fall away all the time. I was a Bible-believing Christian. I did this, and it always ends up with the I dids, by the way, if you ever noticed, talking about the grabbing onto the horns of the sacraments. I served. I was in the worship team. I did children's ministry. I did this, all about the works of them. Never understanding that because you spoke and because you did things had nothing to do with this. Solomon says to Shimei, as you know, your heart acknowledges all the wickedness that you did to David. Therefore, the Lord will return your wickedness. See, your heart knows the sin you did, but you never accepted in your heart the peace I offered you. When we speak with our mouth, are we truly understanding and believing with our heart that Christ is Lord? That Christ died, took our sin, was buried and rose again 3 days later to defeat death and crush the head of the snake. Do we understand that? Do we put our faith in that? Do we not just say it, but believe it? Because if we do, when those temptations come to pull us away from Him, they might cause us to backslide a couple steps. But they never pull us desperately into the wickedness of the world. Can you fall away? To an extent. Can you end up in a bad place? Yeah. But you don't have to be brought back and brought before the King. You normally seek Him back out like the prodigal son. We need to understand that our words and our heart before God are what matters, not the works we do, because they're not going to merit us anything. Those are understandings of understanding that when we have salvation, when we are born again, we wish to do for God. We desire to do for God. But they don't merit our way into some kind of eternal security. Our eternal security comes from knowing God, for giving our heart to Him, from being one of His elect. John tells us that we can know that we are saved, and we can know we are saved when we give our heart to Him and acknowledge Him as Lord. and show a living faith for him. But if all we got are words, all we have is lip service, it will come to nothing. If all we have is grabbing at sacraments, it will come to nothing. If we neglect our relationship with God so that we can do the actions of man, it will come to nothing. And we can, in that case, be assured of nothing. Make sure our faith is a good, living faith, that we haven't just said words to appease the one in authority over us, but that we have truly turned our hearts toward him. That we have truly repented of our ways, been born again, and follow the authority of the one we claim, Christ Jesus. All right. That's where we shall end it for this morning. I hope this was fruitful for you. I hope to see you back again next time. But until then, be blessed.